Hey everybody, Emily Mayer here with The Arena, bringing on our first guest of the Breathe, Hope, Vote weekly video series where we just have some context and conversation about things that are taking place across our state. My hope is that we are always doing everything that we can to make what's happening in legislation around our state transparent and accessible because we know that it's very difficult for the everyday person to follow along what is happening at our state house. So with me today is our very first guest on this video series, my dear friend, Mary Foster. Mary, thank you so much for joining me. Just a quick few words about Mary. Mary has been instrumental in fighting against book censorship, First Amendment right trampling, not just in Beaufort County, where she and I both happen to live, but across our state. She has shown up in Columbia more times than I can count, at the State House, at state school board meetings, to really defend that right to read, and has supported members of our community across our state as they have fought similar battles. So Mary, thank you so much for joining tonight. Anything I left out that you want to share with the world?
No, I think that was lovely, and what an honor to be the very first guest.
Listen, I only start with the best because I want to set that bar high, okay? So no pressure. This is going to be great.
No pressure.
What I want to talk about tonight, super, super glamorous topic, but budget provisos. One in particular that I think really talks to the world that you have just really dived into, that of book censorship. For those who don't know, every year our state legislature passes their budget, and in their budget are different provisos that say what public agencies or state agencies can and cannot do with the public funds that they're receiving from the state. So you might remember that during COVID, there was this whole conversation about mask mandates in schools. That came down to a budget proviso saying any school that's getting public funding from the state cannot require masks. It's a 1-year proviso attached to the budget, but essentially it becomes law because then it never comes out of the budget and we just perpetuate this over and over. So this year in our budget, added in the Senate and now staying, apparently, Mary, you can shine some light on this here and help me understand the process a little bit better, is a proviso that would make it so public libraries have to go through a review of their text. Can you explain that a little bit more for me?
Yeah, so, and I am in no way a budget or state house expert. However, what I do understand is this proviso, the budget isn't finalized, but the proviso for all practical purposes is, and it's in there. And basically, it has this language that says that any county library has to certify that they are not offering any materials of prurient interest to people 17 or under. And it's really a very short proviso. It doesn't have a lot of words, but it does have that tricky word, prurient interest, which probably most South Carolinians aren't entirely sure what that means. So it's short and to the point, but basically they cannot receive funding unless they can certify that they are not making these materials of prurient interest available to minors under 17.
Can you give us an explanation as to what prurient material might be?
So I think that therein lies the problem, in my humble opinion. I am not a lawyer, I'm a teacher. But what we know from Supreme Court cases, et cetera, is what we're talking about is things that are what the general public might just call like inappropriate, right? The problem is that one of the problems is the way that this proviso is written, it's very vague. And so what I might consider inappropriate or of prurient interest, you might consider something different. And the way that this is written, we're supposed to all agree on what that is, and librarians are supposed to inherently know what it is that we all agree about and make sure those things aren't available. So I guess this is a multi-leveled question about what exactly it means and, in my opinion, why it's problematic. But to start at the basics, so librarians are professionally trained experts, right? Librarians have master's level graduate classes to be certified librarians. So it is not my opinion or the opinion of most people that librarians are intentionally and willfully trying to harm minors in the library. Language in this proviso might suggest we think otherwise. And so that to me is the first sort of red flag. But second to that is, again, this concept of what we as parents think is appropriate or inappropriate for our children, that we all sort of universally agree. And we don't all agree about breastfeeding or bottle feeding. So we certainly probably don't agree about what topics are or are not appropriate. And it takes away the rights of parents to have their children have access to the materials that they think are appropriate. It allows instead some unidentified body to determine what is okay and what isn't. What we have seen happen in school districts and libraries across the country is picture books that have representation of two fathers in a family being pulled. Picture books that teach about the accurate history and how Black Americans have been treated being pulled. I personally, as a teacher and a parent, don't think either of those topics are inappropriate, but this proviso paves the way for someone who does to limit my children or your children from having access to materials like that.
And I don't know about you and your experience with librarians, but every librarian I have ever met is just like the best type of person on the face of the earth. To assume that they are doing anything other than acting in the best interest of our children is such a disservice. It's a thankless job, but my gosh, yeah. Okay, so can you help me? Because we live in Beaufort County and we have a pretty strong library system, bigger than other areas in the state. For our smaller, more rural library systems, what kind of toll might this take on them being able to stay afloat?
Sure. So I think one thing that we're hearing from librarians across the state is that it's logistically, they don't have spaces that are that designated and separated. And while there certainly are like children's sections and youth sections, there are not physical boundaries that they can set up or that exist to keep people in and out. The logistics also of just like, are we going to have a carding system where kids have to show their ID and how old they are? How are we going to enforce this? What if we have a person who, is developmentally in one place and physically at a different age? There's just a lot of ramifications.
That's a great point. Yeah.
So when we're talking about these small, particularly rural libraries, they don't have the literally physical space in their facilities, but they also don't have the manpower to figure out the implications of this. And so what we are concerned could happen is huge swaths of materials are removed proactively because they're afraid of losing funding that maybe don't need to be removed. Again, the language of this proviso, I would say, is vague. And my experience watching legislation is that is often very intentional. Mm-hmm. And so when we say they have to certify and we say that it can't be, of prurient interest, those things are vague terms that the general public, and I'm guessing most of the legislators, can't fully explain themselves. So to put that on librarians, and I just want to add, echoing what you said, I think often in this battle to protect the freedom to read, like in 50 years, when we look back at the people who came after librarians,
mm-hmm.
I can't fathom that that's going to be a great look long term. I just like librarians are just
yeah. There's no way that those people are going to be right looking back on this. Like our kids and grandkids are going to be like, who were are they insane? And the answer is going to be, well, maybe I don't. Time
Possibly.
will tell. But I think you're right. I think that the proviso and other legislation is intentionally vague, and I think I know you and I have seen time and time again an over-conservative approach to legislation that is vague, provisos that are vague due to fear of retribution from the state. And I think that's exactly what people like the Freedom Caucus or the senators who sponsored the specific proviso are looking to do. So I think that's a really good point. But I guess the question that I can already foresee people asking, so I want to get ahead of it, is, well, if there is no material in a library that's inappropriate, if there is no pornography, if there's no all of these terms that we keep hearing when we're talking in our circles of book censorship, if that's not existing, then why are we concerned about this proviso? I think you've touched on it a little bit, but if that material's not there, then let's just pass this proviso, people would say, right?
Yeah, and I think like when I first read the wording of the proviso, I can see how someone who has not lived what you and I have lived for the last 18 or so months might think, well, this seems like, yeah, we all agree that 5-year-olds shouldn't see pornography in a library. That all makes sense. I don't think that's actually what this says. So I think that is the first problem. I do not believe there is pornography in public libraries. We have locally established library boards that oversee purchases. We have professionally trained librarians. I just personally do not believe, and it would be very hard for you to convince me otherwise, that there is actual pornography. Now, are there things that are sexually explicit? Sure. Libraries are for all ages and stages of people in our community. They are also separated by age and genre and those things. Librarians are there to help guide people. I also would say that our job as parents when we go to the library is to help direct our kids to the things that interest them. So I teach preschool. I took my preschoolers to our downtown public library last fall for a field trip. And we talked about each of them, what's something you're interested in and where would you find that book in the children's section. Like that is part of my job as their teacher. That's part of our jobs as their parents. So to in any way act like that's not what happens in libraries feels a little false. But also, I think what we're seeing is that while we might all say, sure, 5-year-olds should not see pornography, if we can agree on what pornography is, what we're seeing is books that are being pulled are books that represent things that are not, let me try that again. Books that represent things that make some people uncomfortable. So if I have a husband and 2 children, and that is our family unit, I personally am very comfortable with the fact that some people have a single parent, some people have 2 mothers, 2 fathers, whatever. I came from a divorced parent group, so I had step parents. None of that feels inappropriate or uncomfortable to me. But what we are seeing is people challenging books that make them uncomfortable because it's not their norm. And the problem with that is libraries are for all people. They're for people who have different color skin, who love different people, who identify in different ways. They're for all people. And so when 1 or 2 or 3 people start deciding what stories are appropriate or not, and we're not talking about actual pornography, we're talking about stories that make them uncomfortable, then we are absolutely violating the rights of the rest of the community. I will also add that I think one of the things that gets lost, certainly when we talk about 4 and 5 and 6-year-olds, there's a very different acceptance of sexuality and what's represented in books by most of us, I think. But when we start talking about teenagers, and I have a 19-year-old and an almost 21-year-old, so I have raised children through this. First of all, we should be clear that what's on the internet is really probably what we should be most concerned with our children. Mm-hmm. We desperately want our children to read. As a teacher, also as a lifelong reader, like reading is so critical to so many different areas of knowledge and empathy and all of those things. So we want kids to read. And if reading a book that has sex in it, that is something that I as a parent know about, am okay with, am having a conversation with, that is not pornography. And that's not something that other people need to take away from my child if that's something that we feel comfortable with our child reading. We also know statistically that a lot of young people are victims of sexual assault and rape, and not exposing them to books with topics like that, or topics like homelessness, or topics like addiction, is not protecting them from those things. It is instead keeping them naive to the reality of those things and the implications of those things. So I think that there is perhaps a good intention of protecting children, but I think we sometimes become misguided about that the absence of knowledge is protection. And I would say actually absence of knowledge can be very harmful to children. And I say that as a 25 plus year educator and also as a parent. So
Yeah, absolutely. And in Beaufort County, the reason that Mary and my paths crossed is because two people challenged 97 books, and they were immediately pulled off the shelves. And we called that a book ban, and that made some people angry. And I stand by the fact that we called that a book ban because for over a year, those students were not allowed to access texts that reflected the lived experiences of themselves and their peers. They could not just go on Amazon and buy them. They could not just do the things that these book banners are saying. Oh, well, it's not a ban if you can still go to the library. Well, now you're coming for the library and trying to take them out of the public library too. So we're on to you. We're catching this spiral. And it's not lost on me that one of the 5 books that they banned in Beaufort County after we reviewed all 97 is one that has to do with a school shooting because that content was too mature for our students. Yet that is a lived reality that many of our students in this state and in this nation face. But Mary and I might have another conversation about that on another day. Mary, thank you so much for helping explain this. We will continue to go into this book banning, school regulations, other problematic legislation throughout these video series that we will be doing on Breathe Hope Vote through the arena. So please make sure that you are subscribing to get all of the latest information, and you all have a great day.
Thank you.